Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another interview. We are actually pumping out the interviews for the since the 12th of June. We have actually done, I was just looking at the other day, 12 live streams on this channel. We used to only do 4 a month, so that is a lot more than usual. And some of them, I think they all actually have been very good. So I am joined tonight by a guest that we have had on the channel before. It is a man who was appointed to the Irish Medical Council by Simon Harris when he was the Minister for Health, and he stepped down from the Medical Council on a matter of principle because of how elderly people were being neglected in Ireland in the care homes. And so this tells you that this man has integrity. His principles are more important than the prestige of being on a medical council. And I am absolutely honoured and delighted to have this man back on the stream. And it is Dr. Marcus de Brun. Now, he's going to tell you himself his own qualifications because he has a lot more qualifications than just a GP. So welcome to the stream, Dr. de Brun, and thanks for your time.
And congratulations to you, and well done with all the good work you've done so far. And it's great to be able to speak in alternative media. At least we have an alternative voice to mainstream and to RTE, who are probably doing a lot of damage at the minute that people really aren't aware about. So, you know, well done you, and well done other people who are trying to get a little bit of an alternative view or the other side of the argument of what's going on at the minute.
Thanks very much.
I'm a GP at the moment. Before I became a general practitioner, I was a microbiologist. I studied microbiology at Trinity College, Dublin, and I graduated with my first class honours degree in microbiology in 1997. And after that, I started to study a master's degree in public health at Trinity College, and I interrupted that to finish or to take on a medical degree at the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin. And after I finished that, I worked in Irish hospitals for a couple of years, and then I went to New Zealand. I worked in the emergency department in Drogheda for a couple of years, and then I went to New Zealand and I studied there to become a general practitioner, and I became a member of the New Zealand College of General Practice. And then after that, I returned to Ireland in 2010 and became a member of the Irish College of General Practice, and I opened my own practice in North County Dublin, and I was elected or appointed to the Irish Medical Council by Minister Harris 2 years ago. And yes, I resigned that in April because of what was happening in the nursing homes. I suppose it was an attempt of mine at the time to whistleblow what was going on, the neglect of the elderly, the kind of dumping of positive cases from the hospitals into the nursing homes, the withdrawal of testings from residents in the nursing homes, just the horrible treatment that the elderly people had to endure, and unfortunately the many deaths that resulted. Some estimates between the region of 900 and 1,000 deaths in the nursing home sector because of government neglect and treatment of those people. So yeah, that brings us up to where I am.
That's an amazing career. I would not have remembered all of that. So I'm glad that you said all of that. It's amazing. You went through it before, and you are somebody who is absolutely qualified to, I think, in my opinion, anyways, and I know I'm just a lay person, to come up with a plan for this country, something that's unique to the environment in Ireland and to what happens in Ireland. And you know, every country has little differences, and you are actually in the position where you have to whistleblow, and we are listening to people on the television that are just going along with the same narrative the whole time. Like the last time you were on the channel with me, actually, you were we were actually thinking that there was a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, because we were coming into the summer, and we were thinking hopefully the summer months would be used to kill off this virus and try and maybe get herd immunity. But that didn't happen. Actually, they kept the country locked down, and they kept people social distancing, and now they have actually 3 counties in the country locked down. I'm in one of them, and you're not supposed to leave unless you have all these different reasons. There's actually a very good channel, I should shout this out. There's a channel that goes through the actual law word for word. It's called, the woman's name is Tracy O'Matney. That's the name of the YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to check out the actual laws, you should have a look at that YouTube channel. But I wanted to talk to you, Doctor, this time. We'll start off talking about the models. The models that the government are using here one of them is called this Flaxman model. It's one that was designed in Britain. Do you know anything about this? And the margin of error on this model is something like over 200,000 deaths it can predict in the wrong, and then it can be down as low as 6,000. And this, because of all the different variables, like I'm saying, like every country needs its own sort of plan. This is what I think anyways. And Sweden sort of proves that as well. We'll talk about that as well. But this model with the margin of error and the sort of variables, we're hearing now that meat factory workers were getting contaminated from care, people that were working in care homes that were coming home and they're sharing accommodation with these people. Like you're never, the model hardly had that information been put into it. I doubt it very much. So it really is like, it's not a, I don't know, it's like a joke. I don't know what word to use. It's just like farcical when you're using models with such a margin of error. And then none of the cases I'm hearing these days are going to the intensive care units. When you look at how, like, there's very few people going to the intensive care units, it's all about new cases, but they're not going to the intensive care units, and the deaths are down very low. But the government seem to be they're still hyping up it's always on the media. I have to remind my grandparents every time I meet them, look, don't be worried about the media. If this wasn't on the media, you probably wouldn't even know it was in the country. You actually wouldn't know, to be honest.
Yeah.
So like the media really are messing with people here, because it's the stress of this as well, and the fact that the pubs aren't opening now again. And I listened to an interview the other day with the new Lord Mayor of Dublin. She sort of let it slip that maybe pubs, they'll have to work with pubs in the future or something like this. So it gives sort of an inclination that they mightn't be opening again, the way they worked, the way they were before. We'll have to go through a new normal. But yeah, this model. Do you know anything about the models, or what's going on with these models? Because they're not good.
Yeah. Well, essentially, I suppose, the model that the government is using. I suppose you really have to kind of you've got NPET, the National Public Health Emergency Team, and they're
Yes.
responsible for issuing the government with the guidelines and kind of telling the government what to do as such. So yes, you're right. NPET are using particular data models. But at the end of the day, essentially the modeling systems, the primary initial modeling system was from Professor Ferguson at Imperial College in London, when this kind of kicked off around kind of March, April, and the initial models were predicting several 100,000 kind of deaths unless there was lockdown and that sort of thing. And the initial model that Ferguson and Imperial College used was shown later on to be entirely incorrect, that the data was wrong, that the modelling system itself was wrong. And the Irish government have been using a similar sort of a modelling structure in terms of kind of predicting and analysing the data. But, we can all kind of get lost in modelling data and predictions and numbers, because it all gets very, very technical when you get into kind of the modelling structures and how they're used and what they're trying to achieve. But the behind the model is a very, very simple thing. There's a very, very simple process going on. We've got a virus, we've got the coronavirus in society, and we're trying to deal with it. And effectively, regardless of whatever kind of modeling system is used to come up with the data, there's essentially only two approaches to dealing with the virus. There's only two ways that society can deal with it. And every country has got this kind of choice, and the kind of all countries are jockeying somewhat between the two choices. And the choices are, the first choice when you've got the virus is that you let it go through the community or society in terms of the healthy people. People get exposed to the virus, they develop a degree of immunity to the virus, they're immune to it, and that's the kind of traditional response, or the traditional kind of thing that was referred to as herd immunity. And that was what Professor Neil Ferguson's model, when they came out against that in the UK, and the going against that herd immunity has what's kind of put people into the other side, or what's put us into the other side, or the other option, which is to protect everybody from the virus, to lock the society down, to protect children from the virus, to protect young people, to protect the elderly, to try and keep the virus stop it from infecting anybody. So they're essentially the two models. The first model, to protect those who are vulnerable and allow the virus to go through the community, infecting kind of young, healthy people, or allowing young, healthy people to be exposed to it. And of course, all of those people, all children, all young, healthy people without underlying conditions, they all experience COVID as being something like a common cold or a bad flu. And the people who it seriously causes kind of serious symptoms to are people who've got underlying conditions, like Boris Johnson, for example. He's quite fat and overweight. He's said on several occasions, he's reported in the media as having used cocaine and smoked cigars and stuff like that. So he's got a lot of underlying health issues there, which would place him at slightly higher risk, and he kind of ended up in hospital with a bad case of COVID, just like lots of people end up in hospital with a bad case of flu, you know. So essentially, there's two models. There's the model to kind of stop everybody from getting the virus, and then there's the model to allow the COVID virus to pass through society like a regular cold or flu does, and try and protect the very vulnerable people. The country that's come closest to that side has been the Swedes. They, at the very outset, they said, no, look, we're going to go with the natural approach and let people be exposed to the virus, build up an immunity to the virus. And the other countries like Ireland and the UK, we've gone for the hard approach. So you might describe the two as being the soft approach in Sweden, which is to protect the vulnerable and allow young, healthy people to get exposed and clear the virus and have immunity to it. And then you've got the hard approach, which is us, which is trying to protect everybody from getting the virus. And then you've got kind of the American example, for example, where they kind of flip-flop between the two. They've got lockdown 1 week, and then they've no lockdown. They've got masks and they don't have masks. So they've kind of flip-flop between the two. So essentially you've got the kind of, I suppose, three real kind of approaches going on. You've got the soft approach, which is Sweden, no lockdown, no enforcement of masks, that sort of thing, allowing young people to mingle in kind of and be exposed to the virus. Then you've got our option, the hard lockdown, which is the masks, the mandatory mask, the €2,000, €500 fine, and 6 months in jail, and that. And then you've got this kind of willy-nilly American approach, which is kind of, you know, going down one road for a month and then slamming on the brakes and going down the other road, you know.
Yeah.
But ultimately, as far as the virus is, so that's as far as the humans are concerned. That's what we're doing, and we think we're kind of in control, that we've got these two options and then the willy-nilly approach in the middle. But as far as the virus is concerned, really, we've all kind of got the Swedish approach anyway, because essentially, even though we have a hard lockdown in Ireland and we have these ridiculous regulations about wearing masks in supermarkets and people wearing face masks on buses and all of these ridiculous regulations, essentially people take off the masks. The masks don't work. Some of them are cloth masks. They're letting the virus in. People are contaminating it on their hands. You know, when people get off the bus, the driver's not wearing a mask, or people are, you know, and you have to remember, as far as the virus is concerned, COVID arrived in Ireland from one case, one person. Yeah. So all of these hard lockdown rules, the only way they could ever work is if they were everybody was doing them. Absolutely everybody, 100%. If you have 1%, yeah, if you have 1% of failure, let's say, of the mask rules and everything else, well, then that's, you know, when someone sneezes, there's however many 100,000 viral particles in a sneeze. So you'll never achieve, even though we have this ridiculous kind of hard lockdown and thing, it's a pointless sort of a game that's politically being played. I mean, essentially the masks and the fines and the buses and everything, and all of these rules really, as far as the virus is concerned, they're all very silly, because unless they're 100% effective, you're dealing with a viral particle that's micrometers small. It's so tiny, and there's so many hundreds and thousands and millions of them in a couple of coughs or a sneeze, that unless these rules were being adhered to 100% by everybody in the community, they're not going to work. You're not going to get rid of
No.
COVID-19
And
without a shadow of a doubt. So these rules, essentially, even though we're going for this hard option, we've still got the Swedish approach because the virus is new cases emerging all the time, people still dying of it, still there in the community. So realistically, we have the Swedish approach, regardless of what we do. But
just a longer
unfortunately,
version.
we've a longer version and we've a much more socially destructive version
Yes.
because we're decimating small businesses, we're decimating small companies, we're decimating shops and family businesses, we're decimating the tourist industry, we're decimating the hotel industry. So we're doing a huge amount of damage to our society, but essentially, as far as the virus is concerned, on the
Mm.
microscopic level, we're functioning the exact same as Sweden. So all of these measures that we're doing, all of these hard lockdown measures that we're doing, they're having zero effect on the virus itself. They're having maximal effect on public psychology, on the economy, and the reason for that, I think it's becoming fairly obvious to most people now. I mean, people are kind of asking the question, well, the government would hardly be doing all of this just, to kind of destroy its own economy and that. But people need to remember, there was a lot of people died in the nursing home sector because of government mistakes. There was a lot of death there. And if you remember what happened, here when that unfortunate African American black guy was killed and murdered in the US, people took to the streets here because of
Mm.
that. You know, once
I'll never forget
people,
it.
if people were to start making the connection that the huge amount of death that happened in the nursing home was a consequence of government neglect, then huge, enormous consequences would befall. There would have to be some degree of public inquiry and all of that. And remember, one of the first announcements that Micheál Martin made when he became Taoiseach was on the Ryan Tubridy show, and he said, absolutely, there will be no public inquiry into what went on. So people need to
Mm.
join the dots and think about, the reason that we're going down this mask road is not so much to protect anybody from the virus, it's to protect the government from political consequence of the
Yeah.
horrendous mistakes that they've made. So they're locked in. The government is locked in
Covering themselves.
to following this narrative and keeping going with this narrative and following on from the models that they have at MPET, from following on the MPET advice. Because if that breaks down in any way, if they revise or go backwards in any way, if they admit that we got it wrong on any level, well, coming with that comes a huge, huge amount of mistake, a huge, huge amount
Mm.
of damning,
Responsibility.
very, very
Yeah.
damning political consequence and political responsibility. But the real take home here is that if people think about the tiny size of a viral particle, if people think for a moment that there's always a case zero or case one where the virus arrived in Ireland, one or two people may be coming in at the same time, just no more than one or two people brought the virus into Ireland. So it started out, this whole pandemic began in Ireland with one or two people. And then if they ask themselves, well, is all of this masks and everything, is that going to bring the virus down to even to one or two people? Absolutely not. You'll
No.
always have these numbers, we'll always have these kind of deaths. And we have to start realizing or joining the dots as to why now, as the days are getting shorter, as we're moving into the winter months, well, it's absolutely obvious that Mother Nature's control of cold virus, flu virus, coronavirus, in the history of virology, Mother Nature has controlled these viruses in the community setting because of the length of daylight. You don't see cold viruses and flu viruses in the summer because you've got massive amounts of UV, you've got prolonged 12-hour days, so there's UV, there's sunshine in the environment, and UV light is highly, highly destructive to viral particles. It always has been. There's no kind of tinfoil hat wearing there. So as we move into the shorter days, the control mechanisms that Mother Nature puts on the virus, well, they're dwindling now because we're getting shorter days, less UV light. The virus can live longer in the community. It can be more easily spread in the community. As we've got that going on, and as we have the kind of consequence of the government trying to keep everybody from not getting exposed, then the virus has got loads more potential hosts. So it's got loads and loads and loads of people who, because of all these ridiculous measures, the virus now has loads and loads, hundreds and thousands, if not millions, of people who haven't been exposed to the virus through the natural mechanism. So they're all potential hosts. So essentially everything that we're doing, the vast majority of what we're doing, is in total contradiction to natural science, total contradiction to the natural evolution of viruses, and total contradiction to a lot of kind of common sense, because now we've got thousands, hundreds and thousands of potential hosts, these people who've been wearing masks and protecting themselves. Well, now we've got a situation where the days are getting shorter, the virus is spreading in the community, there's more potential hosts for it to spread to. So those people who are vulnerable to COVID and who were vulnerable from the very, very outset of this, they're now going into the winter months at significantly higher risk in this country than the elderly population are, for example, in Sweden. Because in Sweden, the virus has a much, much harder time now to get to an elderly person, to find potential hosts, young people to be transmitted to, and to kind of reach and be spread to the vulnerable sector of their population. But we're not doing that. We're providing the virus with lots more potential hosts, lots of opportunity to spread, and so essentially we're heading for a bad winter and a particularly bad run of things with COVID, because we're not listening to science, we're not listening to Mother Nature. We're following these guidelines in order to protect the government from any notion that they might have got it wrong. And you said it at the outset, and you're absolutely right. When you look at the Swedish numbers and you look at the deaths that they have over there, I mean, in the past 2 weeks, I think I looked at the numbers this evening. In the past 2 weeks, they've had six, I think we've had 16 deaths, and they've had 33 deaths. So essentially now they've got 3 times the number of vulnerable patients. They've had 33 deaths in the past 2 weeks. We've had about
They're all between
16.
80 and 90 years old, I think, all those people that died. Near enough.
They are.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a very,
Not
very
that
interesting.
justifies it, but
Yeah, well, that's a main point you've made there. That's really missed by people, and it's really missed. That's a point that's consistently manipulated by the likes of RTE and by the likes of the mainstream media. That that the majority of deaths now, according to the CSO, the Central Statistic Office in Ireland, the deaths of COVID-19, 92% of the deaths are in over 65-year-olds. So that's the CSO. If you get on, anyone jumps onto the CSO, Central Statistic Office, they don't make stuff up. They're very reliable. You get onto the CSO website and you look, they've got a nice couple of pages on COVID-19 that they update reasonably regularly. But 92% of Irish deaths, 92%, so over 90%, 92% are over the age of 65. So essentially, we've got, and the manipulation of numbers that comes into it consistently is that the RTE and mainstream media and even the internet, you get on the internet, you'll constantly see this statistic touted out as deaths per million, percent of population, per capita, which is an absolute, that's a complete, it's total bullshit, and it's done for political reasons. Because you take, for example, I've given the example before. Let's say, for example, if COVID-19 was only killing Chinese people. Now, it's a very crude example to make, but let's say COVID-19, 92% of the deaths were in Chinese people, Asian people. Well, if Ireland was to publish a statistic and say, well, we have, 200 deaths per million. Well, the first question you have to ask is well, how many Chinese people how many Asian people do you have in Ireland? Because if we've only got, for example, 200 Asian people in Ireland, and COVID-19 kills all of them, then we've got 200 deaths per million. Let's say we had a population in Ireland of 1 million and
Mm.
200 Asian people, and COVID-19 killed all of those people. Well, then we'd have a death rate of 200 per million. Now, let's say you take another country that has a population of 1 million, and let's say it has 500 Asian people, and COVID-19 only kills half of those. So it kills 200, let's say again. Well, that country would also say, well, we have a death rate also of 200 per million, and it's only killed half of our Asian population. But in Ireland, it's wiped out the entire Asian population. But yet both countries would report the exact same figure. They both say, oh, we've got 200 deaths per million. So
Yeah.
this notion of deaths per million is probably the most destructively devious statistic that's constantly put out there to bash the Swedes. Like, for example, the Swedes, the Swedes have 2 million over 65-year-olds. Ireland's got 650,000 over 65-year-olds. So the Swedes have essentially 3 times the number of vulnerable people. And the statistic is the exact same in Sweden. 92% of all the deaths of COVID-19 are in the over 65. So this is a disease, this is an illness that has a very, very strong, hugely strong demographic profile. Now, if it was killing,
Age
for
demographic.
example, Asian people, you would say it has a very strong ethnic profile. And you would have to look, but people are not looking at the numbers that way. They're looking at this deaths per million, which is absolutely ludicrous, because the UK, for example, the UK has got 12 million over 65-year-olds. So the UK has nearly got 20 times the number of over 65-year-olds that Ireland has. So, and of course, when you look at the deaths that way, when you look at them properly, when you look at the over 65-year-olds in the UK and you say, oh, okay, they've got 20 times the number of over 65-year-olds. And of course, hey presto, they've got roughly 20 times the number of deaths. When you look at the Swedes and you say, okay, they've got 3 times the number of over 65-year-olds, and hey presto, the numbers fit perfectly. They've got 3 times the number of deaths. So when you look at the Swedish model and you see that they've had this soft touch approach, which takes on board a respect for Mother Nature, which takes on board, built into it. Now, not that the Swedes are particularly, I'm sure they're not jumping up and down and wearing grass skirts and being environmentalists or anything, but the Swedish approach of allowing the virus, of trying to cohabitate with the virus and allowing natural mechanisms like natural immunity to develop in the population, that's a natural approach. That's an approach that's tied in with Mother Nature, with the natural cycle, the rise and fall of a virus in a community. You know, the Irish model, the Irish approach and the British approach, using these models and using this data and trying to keep the virus out of, keeping everybody clear of the virus, all that's doing is feeding into massive public fear that the government themselves have engineered. And you know, it's a very strange coincidence when you look at unstable governments. The one thing that's very interesting about the Swedish government is they have a very strong government. When the Swedes, if you listen to Anders Tendel or you listen to people talking about the Swedish approach or Swedish government, the way that the Swedes, the kind of mindset in Sweden, now I'm no expert on Sweden, but for the people I've talked to and what I've listened to and read, the mindset in Sweden in terms of their politics, they elect experts or they elect people to do a job, and then they back off and they let the experts do their job as such. So there's a tremendous amount of respect that and trust that the Swedes have in their government. Now, if you compare that to the Irish model and the UK model and even the American model, when you come into countries that have political instability, well, when you've got political instability, strangely enough, you find these really hard lockdowns, this real kind of public face of the government protecting everybody, doing lots of things, controlling lots of things, doing all of this hard lockdown and that. And essentially, it's really more a reflection of political instability. But what's going on at the minute in terms of lockdown has absolutely nothing to do. Masks and all that rubbish has very, very little, if anything, to do with virology, the spread of the virus or anything. It's more about political protection, political establishment, bringing and imposing and trying to hold on to a degree of political stability. So government has created a huge
Legitimacy.
amount of fear, a huge amount of fear in the general public. And then, of course, it's a little bit like, when you go to the solicitor and you want to get something done, if you want to sell a house or you want to do something with the solicitor, the solicitor, you give them your papers and you give them your check or whatever for your retainer. And then usually the solicitor will call you in a couple of weeks and he'll tell you that he's found a whole heap of problems that only he can solve, and it's going to cost you a few extra bucks, but this has to be done and that has to be done.
Yeah.
We're in the same sort of situation. The government has created a massive amount of fear that only it can take care of, can mind the children, look after, the community, look after everybody, lock down the schools, have all this social distancing in the pubs, and all of that shit, all of this crap is totally worthless and useless crap. If you were to get any virologist, microbiologist, any kind of scientist from an Irish academic institution, from University College Dublin, from Trinity College Dublin, if you got a microbiologist on or a virologist on and you ask them, are these masks going to work? Are these screens and all of these visors people are wearing, are they going to work? Are they doing anything in terms of the actual function of the virus? They're going to laugh because they're what we're doing has no basis really in science, and it's never been done before because it's a stupid sort of an idea to think that we might be able to control, the natural evolution of a virus with all these community measures. So what we're doing makes sense in only one view, and that's in a political view, in protecting the government from consequence of its horrendous mistakes. So and the debts, the huge number of debts. So protecting the government and then feeding back to the people a real sense of security for all of the insecurities that the government itself has created from the outset of all of this. So we're really locked into a terrible kind of a catch-22,
Yeah, and
But I suppose,
another thing is, why international travel still going, Doctor? Does that make sense? I just wanted to say that. Does that make sense at all? Like locking down the country and stopping people from traveling from Offaly, Kildare and Laois, and then at the same time they're accepting asylum seekers. And I'm not saying anything bad about these people or anything. I'm just saying they could have the virus. They're accepting people coming in through the airports. Like, this sounds like madness to me as well. And this is something that people bring up the whole time. Like, the virus is walking in off the planes.
Think about it. Look, you don't need to be a virologist or a microbiologist or anything like that. You don't need to be a scientist to kind of get your head around the absolute stupidity of saying to people, well, if such and such a country has got low levels of COVID, then you can travel there fine. But if such and such a country's got high levels of COVID, you can't go there. I mean, did you ever hear of anything as ridiculous? They're talking about levels of COVID as if it was buckets of paint or as if it was kind of, stacks of washing machines or something, or some kind of, as if they were kind of ball bearings or something, I mean, if you go into a society that has low levels of COVID and there's COVID there, and if people are traveling back and forth in that society and one person picks up COVID-19 and brings it back, then that person can potentially spread that virus to literally hundreds and thousands of people. There's absolutely these measures, going into the pub and spending €9 before you before you can get a pint. There's no virology in any of that. I mean, I was in a hotel with my wife there at the weekend in Wexford. We went to a nice hotel in Galway. I went to visit a friend of mine, and I have to say, I do not like going to hotels. I never really was mad on the idea, but I like taking the kids to the pool in the hotels, so they can get a bit of a swim and have a bit of a crack. But the joy was gone out of it. We have this ridiculous situation where we've all the staff in the hotels all going around with
Oh
masks and
God.
visors, and then all the residents, all the residents in the hotel are all kind of, going around. I mean, if you've ever, I'm sure you've been in an Irish hotel, but if you
Yes.
go down the corridor of an Irish hotel, the people staying, there's one door on one side of the hall, there's another door on the other side of the hall. They're about a meter, if even less than that, apart.
Hmm.
You people are passing each other in the corridors. They're going to the toilets. They're having their breakfast. They're going in and out of the restaurant. But you've got
Touching the
the
lift.
staff going around with these plastic things on,
Jesus,
and these
that's
plastic
mad.
these plastic things, these are hilarious. I have patients coming into my practice all the time now, and people who find it very difficult to wear the masks, well, they're wearing these ridiculous looking like welder's virus.
I see the
Now,
visor. Yeah.
these visor things, there isn't anything more stupid than those things, because I mean, all they're doing is, if you cough into somebody's face, then they'll afford you some degree of protection. But of course, all the air is going up in, and it's going down in the top, and it's going in the sides. They're absolutely ridiculously
Hmm.
stupid things. You should do, if we're recording this, you should actually just go onto the net and just get a Google a picture of kind of the viral kit that virologists wear when they're trying to protect themselves from viral infection. You see them when the Ebola outbreak in Africa. That's proper antiviral
Mm.
attire. Proper masks, not
From head
letting
to
the
toe.
air in. That's
Yeah.
proper antiviral. The kind of stuff that the public are being asked to do. I mean, the government are really just making fools out of hundreds and thousands of people in Irish society. They really are just making fools out of people,
And
And
it's worse than that.
unfortunately, yeah, well, it is
They're
exactly.
destroying
Just, I
businesses,
suppose,
people's peace of
yes,
mind. But
and
yeah, go
that's
ahead.
the serious. That's exactly the serious side. If you stop just at the mask and how silly all of that is in terms of virology and the spread of viruses, I mean, there's enough evidence there on the internet. There's a lovely page that somebody sent to my Twitter account that's got kind of quotes from the British Medical Journal, from the Nature, from all of that. There's enough science and research out there, and I'll send it to you. Actually, you can put it up on the video, but there's enough kind of science and research out there to show that these mask things are completely stupid. The viruses or the visors that people are wearing, they're absolutely completely ridiculous. But yes, you're absolutely right. That's where the fun and game stops.
Mm.
When you think about how silly it is to wear a mask in terms of the virus and virology and how viruses spread and how little virus you need in a society before it becomes a pandemic, all of this masks things are ridiculously and funny to the point, but the humor stops there, and it kind
Mm.
of becomes very, very sinister and very, very dark when you think of the families, the pubs, the industry, the jobs, but at the end of the day, I put a tweet up on my Twitter feed there to say before that, large sectors of the Irish society, important sectors like doctors, like police, like teachers, large important sectors, and I don't mean important in that they're any different to someone who drives a bus or someone who drives a taxi. Everybody's important, but I mean that they're important in terms of unions, in terms of lobby, and in terms of power. Large
Mm.
large groups in Irish society who have that potential lobbying power, who have that potential influencing power in the government, who have big unions and corporate backing behind them. People like doctors, people like nurses, people like teachers, these organizations, all of these groups are being effectively bribed into following
Mm.
this ridiculous, stupid narrative. And because a lot of people say to me, they say, "Hey, Marcus, how come so few GPs are kind of speaking out about what's going on?" And there are plenty of GPs who would like to speak out, and I have plenty of colleagues. I mean, that's where I was actually when I was down in Wexford. I was with a very good friend of mine, a good GP, and we were having a laugh at how ridiculous the mask is, and then also nearly having a cry at how bad our society, the damage that's been done to our society. But we
Mm.
were also both aware, and some other GPs too, were also both aware that GPs in Ireland are effectively being bribed by
Yes.
the government to go along with the narrative. And how we're being bribed is fairly obvious. I mean, I might get, let's say, somewhere between 40 euros and 100 euros per year for a medical card patient on average. So some patients I might get a little bit more, some patients I might get a little bit less, but on average it's about, let's say, 100 euros a year for each of my medical card patients. Now, I get that 100 euros per year, even if Mary with the medical card comes to see me 100 times in the year. I get 100 bucks a year for my medical card patient. But at the moment, because of the guidelines, if Mary doesn't come to my surgery and I ring her, I get 30 bucks a telephone call.
God.
If Mary, so essentially, if I ring Mary 3 times during the COVID, I've got double income on Mary. I've got my 100 bucks a year and 3 telephone calls. I've double income on Mary. If Mary has a little cough, or if any of my patients have a little cough, and I have to do a COVID respiratory test on them, I get paid, I think it's 80 or 100 bucks if I treat, or if I feel, or if I believe, if I buy into the narrative, oh my God, this might be COVID. If I buy into that, then my practice can sustain itself. Now, I'm not doctor bashing on my colleagues, because my private practice, since COVID started, was decimated, and without having some extra payments from the government, certainly I would have taken a massive big hit. I don't know even if I might have survived or been able to carry on in general practice. So I suppose, the government is, to be fair, I suppose, is giving special privilege and giving, special help to GPs to keep them going. But my point is not so much the right and the wrongs of that. That's probably a separate issue that people need to be asking questions about. My point is that people like doctors, people like nurses, and you get onto YouTube and just put in dancing nurses in the hospital, you'll see hundreds of empty hospital wards with nurses doing dances up and down. Now, my sister is a nurse. I have the greatest respect for nurses. Nurses work very, very hard. But nurses, if they're not seeing patients and patients aren't coming to the wards, which they haven't been, 100,000 tests have been missed, cervical cancer screens, breast check screens, all of that work. The people were still paid for that. The nurses are still paid for that. The doctors are still paid for that. There's empty hospitals, empty hotels that were purchased, to be COVID hubs. They're staffed, and the people there are standing around doing nothing. So you think about the Garda Síochána and the amount of overtime hours that are being put in there, and young Gardaí being pulled out of the training college and kind of pushed through the ranks faster. And teachers, for example, I mean, this notion of being able to, when kids go back to school, we're only going to have 10 kids in a class. We might only have 2 days per week. I mean, that all effectively translates into an awful lot less teacher hours or at the very least, an awful lot more control for teachers to be able to dictate their workload, dictate what's coming into the school, dictate when kids come into the school, dictate how long kids spend in the school. So all of these important sectors, doctors, teachers, nurses, the guards, people are asking, well, why isn't anybody complaining about this? People are effectively, if you buy into the narrative, if you buy into this kooky, crazy bullshit narrative that the government has going, if you buy into that, well, you'll do financially quite well if you're a professional like me. So the professional classes, the unionized kind of powerful classes like doctors and teachers and the guards and all of that, they're essentially doing rather well as long as they buy into the narrative. So there's a real imbalance, whereas Mary and John, who own a pub in Ballyconnell, or who own a small shop here, there, or whatever, the small business or people, family run hotel, or those sorts of people, they're hemorrhaging and they're suffering hugely, whereas big sectors, for example, the unemployed, I mean, given lads and given girls and guys 350 euros a week to sit in your arse and scratch a hole and smoke your brains out on dope every week, that's not a good place to be for society. Just because the Irish government can go to Europe and borrow all of the money to pay off teachers, pay off doctors, pay off unemployed people, just funnel money into the country at these big sectors. That's keeping all this show on the road. But the sad
That can't
thing
last
that people
forever,
are, no, and it won't last forever. And the sad
though.
thing is that the deficit so far was 8 billion this year. What last month the government published its deficit was 8 billion. That's gone into the COVID, and the estimates are that it's going to be for the year. It's going to be about 30 billion. Now
My
that
God.
money, that money comes out of hospital beds, footpaths, schools, teachers, education. So we're all on a bit of a short-term jolly. The doctors are doing reasonably well. We're surviving. And
Mhm.
some doctors are probably doing a lot better. As I said, the more you buy into the narrative, I don't particularly buy too much into the narrative, and we'll go around wearing PPE all day long and ringing every single patient rather than getting them into the practice. But the more I do buy into the narrative, the more I get financially rewarded. And that's the same, as I say, across these big, big sectors. But all of that money, that is our money. That's our children's money. That's money
Yes.
that this government will not have to answer for, because they'll be gone. They'll be, by the time that has to be paid back, by the time the bills start coming in for that, well, the people responsible for borrowing it all, they'll be gone. So it
Yeah.
seems like we're in this lovely win-win situation where we can have all of these lovely COVID regulations, everybody getting money, doctors, everybody, all the professionals, the
It's
important
ridiculous.
voting people, all getting big, big balls of money, unemployed people, balls of money for everybody, and it's all being borrowed from abroad, and nobody's thinking that this is actually, this is, what did the old farmer say? Don't piss on my back and tell me it's raining. But that's
Mm.
essentially what the government is doing to us, to our society at the moment. It's pissing on
Borrowed
our
time.
backs and telling us that it's raining.
Yeah.
So we are in a very, very sad place, a very sad place. It's a real sad kind of time for Ireland, because this was a country once, I think, that had a history of intellectuals, and I don't mean intellectuals in the sense of hoity-toity people who think they're better than other people, but it was a country where we had people like Samuel Beckett and James Joyce, and we had great politicians and great speakers. We have a very, very proud intellectual heritage of thinkers, of speakers, of revolutionists, of revolutionaries. I mean, one of my heroes, and I think one of most young Irish kids' heroes, would be someone like Pádraig Pearse. Pádraig Pearse was a beautiful man. Absolutely beautiful. He wanted beautiful things for Ireland. No, I mean, I'm not saying that it was great that he shot people or whatever, that he was a rebel, but I'm
I know.
thinking of his poem. He had a lovely poem called "The Wayfarer," which is an absolutely beautiful poem. And it's a couple of lines in that. He says something along the lines, and all these things too must pass.
Mm.
He talks about the beauty of Irish culture and the beauty of Irish society. So I don't want to get sidetracked, but my point
I
is
think we
that it it's a real tragedy that we actually have here. As you said at the outset, Ireland has a different population, a different demographic. We're an island, a different climate, a different number of elderly people. We have a totally different, we could have approached this and could be managing this relative to ourselves, what this problem is, dealing with this ourselves, dealing with this in our own way, just like the Swedes are doing. We could have done that. And we did have, at one point in this country, we had the intellectual, and we certainly still have the scientific capabilities, the intellectual capabilities, the medical expertise, the political kind of, infrastructure. We have it all there. But something very strange has happened to Ireland in the past kind of, 30, 40 years, between coalition and coalition and coalition. We haven't had strong political leadership. We haven't had any sense of self, any sense of identity or direction or that sort of thing.
We
And we're
export our
in a
best people now.
we do, and we're in a very, very vulnerable place at the moment, where, as I said, at the minute the government is effectively pissing on our backs and telling us all that it's raining, and it's a sad. It makes
It is.
me kind of very disappointed to be an Irish man when I don't see any revolution out there. And when I don't mean, you know, storming the Bastille and throwing Molotov cocktails, but I don't see, you know, people out complaining. I don't see, you don't hear it on the media, people striving to get the other voice out there, people questioning, people challenging. You know, we're pretty much following along the mainstream kind of narrative, you know, without this notion that, hey, this is all going to be paid for, have to be paid for, out of footpaths, schools, hospitals and roads and infrastructure. And people don't get it, that all of this masks and visors, how stupid and pointless all of that stupid shit is. And we have the proof there. We have the Sweden, we have the Swedish numbers, we have the Swedish data. So it's all there for us. But in contradiction to all of that, we're following along this really idiotic sort of a brainwash narrative, you know. And I suppose it's very important for people to get it into their heads that this narrative, following this narrative, is not just simply about protecting the government from consequence. I think that's the primary objective to what's going on. That's why you're in lockdown in Laois or whatever, you know, that's why these counties have been locked down, and the masks and the €2,000 fine. It's all just pushing us down the road in order to protect the government from any sort of consequence, because they've made the biggest political blunders in the history of the Irish state that have resulted in hundreds of deaths. It doesn't end there, you know. This notion of the mask, other people, the thing is that other organizations and other people are coming in and are parasitizing off the Irish state, you know. So, like, I mean, people like me, I don't think doctors and nurses and that, we're not parasites as such. We're essentially being bought and bribed to go along with the narrative, and our livelihoods kind of depend on it. So, you know, that relationship between us is complex. But the parasites who are coming in are the vaccine makers. There's a real parasitizing relationship going on here that people haven't twigged yet. And, you know, people haven't got it into their heads yet that once the government makes masks mandatory for people, once it's mandatory to go into shops, well, people haven't realized there's only one way out of the mask. Only one way. And the only way out of the mask is not natural, nature-born immunity, because the government has said to you, that's not going to happen. The government is going to protect you from that. So if the government is going to protect you from that, then, and the government is going to prevent that from happening, then the government is fundamentally obligated to give you the only other option for protection, and that comes from the end of a needle. So the only escape from this bullshit rubbish about masks in the shops and masks on the buses and masks on young people and kids can't go back to school and all that crap, the only escape from that is a vaccine. And, you know, it's the real sad thing is people haven't twigged that the guys who are pushing the masks, Professor Luke O'Neill, for example, who's on pretty much every mainstream media show in Ireland, you know, he owns his own biotech company, himself and four other people, called Citrix.
Most people wouldn't know that.
They don't know that. They don't know that. And but if you get in SITRYX, if anybody puts that into their Google server, they'll see that it's a biotechnology company that makes drugs that modulate the immune system. Now, all vaccines, every single vaccine out there has inside it drugs which modulate the immune system. The relationship between Professor Luke O'Neill's research and vaccines, that relationship is rock solid. And it's so rock solid that the people who are making the COVID vaccine, GSK and Lilly, well, they're Professor Luke O'Neill's, they're Citrix biggest funders. And it's right there on his website, on Citrix website. You'll read it, about us. If you click the About Us page, it shows GSK. We've got funding from GSK for 60 million or 30 million euros last year. We got a lab from them. Professor O'Neill got researchers from them. So the relationship between Professor O'Neill and the manufacturers of the vaccine, that's black and white. There's no tinfoil hat there. Anyone can find it. It's there. But the strange thing is, nobody is asking about that. No RTE. He's been into Professor O'Neill has been interviewed on countless RTE and mainstream media, and not once, and I've seen a lot of his interviews, not once has he once been asked about his relationship with the vaccine makers. And as I
It's
said, bear
conflict
in
of interest.
mind, absolutely, it's a it's a massive conflict
Mm.
of interest. And bear in
And he
mind
wants to get
that,
people locked into the mask. He's constantly on about the
but
mask, isn't he? Talking
absolutely,
about,
because
yeah,
if they're locked into the mask, if
yeah,
the
they're locked
mask
into the
becomes
vaccine.
mandatory, which it has, then the only escape from the mask is the vaccine. So,
Unbelievable.
it's really, really, that's what I mean about kind of parasitizing. There are industries, because once a vaccine is mandated for the state, that means instead of 650,000 over 65 vulnerable people who might get the vaccine, now we're in a situation where it's 4.6 or 4.7 million people are going to get the vaccine. In the
Mm.
UK, it's 50 million people are going to get the vaccine. So there's a huge, huge financial incentive, huge. And that's what I mean. I mean, I don't think that the Irish government is working for GSK. This is what I mean by parasitizing. These
Mm.
companies, these drug companies are coming in and they're looking at the political instability in countries and they're encouraging the mask wearing, and the government is embracing the mask wearing because then the government is feeding back to the people, we're looking after everybody, we're
Yep.
doing our best for you guys, don't look back,
Unbelievable.
don't look into the past, there's no mistakes made, let's
It's
all
a
look
vicious circle.
forward, we're doing a great job, everybody put the mask on. So when you've got corporations who see what's going on, they're right in there and they're feeding into that. So what's going on in terms of the media blackout? Like there's a media blackout for people like me. RT would never contact me, mainstream media. I mean, I've spoken on Niall Boylan's show and I've spoken on Red FM and Cork FM, but I'd have a very, very limited access. People don't essentially contact me or want to speak to me, or they don't contact virologists, microbiologists from
No.
UCD or Trinity. You don't see these people on the media. There's a real blackout there, but people aren't joining dots to see what's going on, why this particular narrative about the mask and the consequence of vaccine, why that's kind of on the table as the only option and the mainstream media are completely behind it.
Mm.
It's
Luke O'Neill's
sad
not a
in Ireland.
virologist, is he, Doctor? Luke O'Neill.
No, he's not. No, he's a biochemist.
But he's
He's
talking like
sort
as
of.
if he was an expert on all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's not a biologist. He's a biochemist. He's not a medical doctor. He's not a
That's
microbiologist.
amazing.
He's not a virologist. He's essentially a biochemist.
That's
But
unbelievable. Weren't
yeah,
we told months
it's
ago that the masks were a bad idea? I remember the World Health Organization saying this in February. No, don't be buying masks. There's no need for everybody to be wearing masks. And people
yeah,
must have a short memory because now they're telling us that we
but
have to wear them. That
Professor
is
Professor
another
O'Neill,
example of the
Professor
madness.
O'Neill, Professor O'Neill himself, when the talk started about masks, there's a lovely clip on YouTube. You'll find it. I think it's up on my Twitter feed. There's a lovely clip of him talking about how the masks are a terribly bad idea, how people touch them and they put them on their hands and they get the bug on their hands, and how
Yeah.
they're a very bad idea. And he even goes as far to say as when Ryan Tubridy asked him, well, why are we all talking about masks? And he said, well, I guess people have just been watching too many horror movies.
God almighty, yeah. And then it was
So
the tree
he,
cutting. Hold on. Parasite.
absolutely. And then very strangely then, within a few weeks, within a month or so, he does an absolute complete 180-degree turn about face, and he's insisting, and his Twitter feed is hugely informative. If you get onto his Twitter feed, he's got this wonderful big countdown to the vaccine, 36 weeks left, ticking down the minutes, what does he call it? They've got a name for it or something, rapid speed or some some kind of a
Oh,
tagline, kind of Operation Desert Storm, Operation Rapid Vaccine, some crap shit like that. But yeah, it's in the realm of kind of,
doomsday clock.
we're laughing at it like we're laughing about the masks. It is kind of funny in a way, but behind
Yeah.
that funniness, there is a lot of dangerous stuff. Ireland is in a very, very dangerous place. The Irish population is in a dangerous place. Irish people are in a dangerous place. And all of this kind of this bullshit about the masks, I mean, it's put us back as a society almost into a bit of a civil war mentality, because now
Mm.
you've kind of neighbors looking out the window and seeing, oh, so and so's not wearing a mask, and
I was just thinking
so and
that.
so's back from their holidays in Spain,
Mm.
those fuckers. And then they're meeting in the
Snitching on
garden,
people.
maybe across the fence, and saying, oh, hi Joe, hi Bill. And then people are sitting down at the dinner table going, can you believe that asshole wasn't wearing a mask? So we've got this terrible divisiveness that government
Mm.
is fostering in society. And real, the cliches abound, but it's a real case of divide and conquer. But
Yeah.
we've never lived in such a divisive society before. And it's a win-win for government, because as we said at the outset, when the winter days, as the days kick in, the days get shorter, and there's less UV light, so community spread becomes more common. The virus lives longer on surfaces, lives longer outside in the environment, in the air, it survives longer. As that natural process kind of kicks in, plus the consequence of the government's hard line on keeping us all protected, so all the healthy people who would have normally just got a cold, so we've got loads of potential hosts, and we've got very little UV light coming in. So these perfect storm, this is happening now. So in Ireland, in the past kind of 2 weeks, we've had kind of how many deaths? I think we've had somewhere in 10, 12 deaths in the past kind of week or so.
Yeah.
It's starting again. It's coming back. The
Mm.
cases are going up. The deaths are going up, and that's simply because the days are getting shorter. But the real sad thing about that is about the natural evolution, about what's going to happen is that the people who are going to get blamed for that are going to be the people who didn't wear the mask, people like Brun and your man Paul, who had him on, critiqued. He was interviewing all these wacky guys who were encouraging people to go out there and get the virus. So
But I was
the
thinking, Doctor, if the recession comes, will all these people that are being paid off now, will they start to speak up when there's a famine, or when there's actually a recession, a big time recession, and then they realize, hold on, we were being paid off, and now look at the state of the country. There isn't enough money to do this or that. We can't borrow from the EU inevitably, can we? I know that Micheál Martin has committed to giving actually 16 billion back to the EU, more than we normally give over the next 5 years. Now, they did get a cut of a 1.8 trillion deal between 28 member states, so that's a huge amount of money as well. But I don't think it can last forever. I think there is a recession on the way. A lot of people are predicting this. And do you think that will lead to more people speaking out, more actual doctors and professional people? Because they'll say, like, what's the point anymore in staying quiet about this? We knew it was been handled wrong all along anyways, so we might as well
well,
just speak out the truth now. Like,
yeah, well, I think you're right. Look, when you say, I mean, what you're saying is I think what you're putting the question, is the consequence of all this borrowing, is it going to be a recession? And that's a fair question. I don't know the answer to that. Is the consequence of all this borrowing going to be a recession? How long is the central bank just going to keep the gates open and giving the government as much money as they want? And when
Mm.
is the consequence of all of this borrowing going to come home to roost? I suppose what the government is thinking, and what kind of economists, and I'm not an economist, but I suppose what economists generally think is that you keep borrowing the money and pummel it into society and keep society chugging along until the trouble is past, and then we can kind of go back into, I mean, where the wealth comes from is the environment. So we've got to take out natural resource. Ireland's got to chop down forest, and we've got to kind of produce beef and produce the things that we make, or tax kind of corporate entities. We've got to generate the money to kind of pay it all back. So I suppose it is a legitimate question. When's it going to end, and when's going to be, where are the consequences? And I don't know if the consequence will be recession, but the consequence will be one of two things. It will either be an economic recession, or we keep borrowing. But even if it isn't an economic recession, then all of the wealth that has to be kind of generated to pay this money back, well, there's two consequences to that. That wealth has to come, because all wealth comes from the environment. It comes from natural resource that we dig up out of the earth. So the can that's been kicked down the road, really, from my own concern, I think, really, is essentially two concerns. First of all, the money in 10, 15 years time that Ireland is generating, like I do honestly believe that Ireland is actually, for the past 20 years, we've been going through an economic boom in Ireland. Every country has had its industrial revolution. Ireland was deprived its industrial revolution because we were under British rule. We didn't have an industrial revolution in Ireland. I think that we started to have our industrial revolution in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and that we've been going through a massive economic boom in Ireland. But the wealth from that boom is siphoned off, and it's paid back in like corporations not paying their taxes, not paying, big industries not paying their taxes, not paying their fair share. So the two consequences I think that we'll see is not so much a recession. Number one, we'll see when this all has to be paid back again, Ireland will be equally more deprived of its natural wealth, of its entitlement. We should live in a country where there are footpaths everywhere, there are zebra crossings in towns and villages, where there are 12 kids in a classroom, where we have a first-rate health service. We've actually have the wealth to do those sorts of things, to have a first-rate health service, to have 12 kids in a classroom, to have environmentally sustainable mechanisms of dealing with our problems. We could have a first world country on a par with what some of the Scandinavians are doing. But the wealth to pay for that is constantly siphoned off by crooks in Ireland, by corporate crooks and corporate entities. So this consequence that you're saying, will we have a recession? We may not have a recession, and maybe we will, but certainly the wealth in 10, 12, 5, 10 years or whatever, the wealth that should be going to my children, to Irish society, to reintroducing native species to Ireland, to replanting native forests, to making Ireland a beautiful, and it is, I think, one of the most beautiful countries in the world.
I
But
agree.
it needs its resource, its wealth and its power and its self-confidence in order to be able to create, to rebuild. I mean, remember, 1,000 years ago in Ireland, only 1,000 years ago, 98% of Ireland was indigenous forest, was wild forest in Ireland. Now, of course, I'm not saying I'd want Ireland to be covered in forest again, but what I'm saying
No,
is
but
that's down to about 2% now. 2%. When the British came into Ireland and they mowed out the oak forests in order to build the fleets to fight the Spanish Armada and everything, Ireland has been raped, screwed, pillaged. We've been the poor sister and abused by the British, by the colonials. But the sad thing is that now we're being raped and pillaged by our own politicians, by our own people. Like, that's the real kind of
that is,
tragedy here. It's not going to be, I don't think, a recession. Maybe it will. But really where it's going to hit is the environment is going to have to pay, because all of our wealth is generated, as I said, environmentally, and the wealth, the 30 billion or whatever that's going to have to be paid back, well, that will be siphoned out of Ireland nice and slow, and we'll be left for another 50 or 60 years trundling along with a shitty education system, a shitty university system, a shitty library system, a shitty public transportation system, shitty footpaths, crappy fucking roads. And people accept this. Irish people, this is the real tragedy that I can't understand. Irish people accept this, that we are actually a very wealthy, very powerful, very, very beautiful nation. I mean, one of the most interesting facts about Ireland that people have seemed to have forgotten or don't even realize is that in the entire EU, in the entire European Union, Ireland owns 24% of the ocean. One country, however member states there are in the EU, we own the largest amount of ocean. The Irish Sea, we have the biggest share of
we
ocean
can't fish it.
than all of the other EU countries we have. We own that. Like, our wealth, Irish natural wealth, our wealth and our culture and our strengths, if we had indigenous control over our resource and our money, we could have a vision of returning back and having our language back and having some cultural values again and having traditional music and injecting life into the villages that are slowly been strangled by the likes
Mm.
of the IKEAs and the Tesco's and all the rest, we could actually create a very, very beautiful version of ourselves and an identity. We could build a country, but we need resource to do that. And
And
to
we need
me,
honest people.
that's the well we need honest leadership, but
Yeah.
that's the recession that's coming down the line. I think it
Yeah.
may not be an economic recession, but certainly the wealth that our children, because we're still locked into this ridiculous colonial mindset that if you drive a Jag and you live in a big house and you're the king and you've got an island in the kitchen, that you're the king of the shit heap. We're still kind of locked into that stupid
We are.
mindset. Doctors, lawyers, everybody wants the big cabin house, the big palatial gates with the eagles and the gold and all that crap.
Mm.
But there's a generation of intelligent people like yourself, like young people, like my kids, who are coming behind, and they're looking at the kind of Charlie Haughey,
Just
designer
thinking of it.
label Gucci handbag. I mean, there's a lovely clip there of Leo Varadkar, and he's in some designer shoe shop pulling on a pair of designer shoes. All of
Seen
that
it.
crap. All that crap of Gucci and labels and all that stupid, idiotic, moronic bullshit.
I mean,
There's a generation coming behind us of young people, my kids' generation in their 20s. There's a young generation coming behind who see what total bullshit crap that is. And they see their wealth as being minimalist, as having a simple life, a simple
yeah.
house, a simple car, a simple phone that's got my music on it, a simple laptop's got all my media on it. They don't need all of the labels and designer crap that the older generation is
Mm.
still fucking enamored by.
Yeah.
So the sad thing is to cut a, I suppose, a fucking long story short, the sad thing is I think the generations coming behind, they will be deprived of a lot of the resource where they could do what we can't do, which is make
Mm.
Ireland into to living up to its destiny, to living up to being one of the most beautiful countries on the planet. Not just simply beautiful because it is physically beautiful, but beautiful in the sense of its social investment. Like Ireland is
Yeah.
great. Ireland thinks that social investment is giving more people more dole money so they can go to Tesco's and buy more plastic crap at Tesco's. But social investment is what the Scandinavians are doing. It's putting like 6 kids, 7 kids in a classroom. It's
Mm.
putting fucking footpaths in. It's putting in. I mean, I remember when I lived
Making
in
it
New. I
cheaper to
lived
have
in New.
children and families.
Yeah,
That's too expensive here to do that.
absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
yeah.
I,
We're
I
important
remember when
people.
I lived. Absolutely. Supporting people. I remember when I lived in New Zealand, and New Zealand is an amazing country, absolutely beautiful country, because they're all about this thing called social investment. But social investment doesn't mean giving people more dole and giving less taxes to corporates. That's what the
Better
Irish
quality
version
of
of
life.
social investment is. Throw money, get everybody, bribe the fuck out of everybody. But I remember living in New Zealand. New Zealand's got this fantastic organization called DOC, the Department of Conservation. And anywhere you are in New Zealand, you get onto the DOC website if you want to go on a walk, and you put in, where you put in kind of you want to go on a hard walk, a medium walk, or a soft walk, kind of 3 or 4 grades. It asks you what kind of a walk, how long do you want to go for a walk. It'll geolocate, find out where you are, and it'll spit you out, 20, 30 options to go on a walk, to go on a trail, on a DOC trail. And they have beautiful trails into their countryside, into the all around little signposts, all very respectful of the environment. My point is, get on an Irish website and try and find, where's a nice place to go for a walk in Dublin or Cavan or whatever. You're going to find about 50 different organizations, Walk Ireland, Walking Way, Walk this, Walk that, and you're going to give yourself a migraine trying to find, because you've all these quangos, you've got
Yeah.
these hundreds and hundreds of organizations who are all getting money from the government, and they just post up this stupid website with zero information on it that just kind of sucks you in for about 20 minutes of your time trying to figure out, okay, I just want to go for a walk in Clare, or I want to go for a walk in Leitrim. You can't do it. The whole kind of the system in Ireland is all about quangos, organization, social investment is all about giving people money. It's not about investing into society. So I suppose, to get back to your point, I think the real recession is not so much going to be an economic recession. It's going to be a continued
Mm.
social recession, because that's what we have in Ireland. That's what we've had for the past 40 years in this country. We've had plenty of opportunity, plenty of wealth, but none of it goes to social investment. It goes into kind of bribing people like me, like doctors, giving the powerful sectors more and more money. But then you walk around the villages and you try and find a footpath or a zebra
Mm.
crossing, you try and connect up two villages and you try and find a bike lane. You find these little token investments where they've got a little blue way here and they make a big fuss
A
about a
green
little
or
walk
something.
around the mountain there. But compared to what we could have done, what we could be doing with our wealth, it's a million light years away. People in this
Yeah.
country are totally conned. We're being conned by our government and being conned by this coronavirus. And that's where this notion of, when the money, having to pay it back, that's how we're being conned at the minute, because the
Yeah.
government is borrowing, 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 and it's our children, it's future generations that will have to pay it all back.
Yeah, but exactly. But the 30 euros per phone call and that, I don't think that will last forever. And I'm thinking, like, if that stops, will that lead to more professional people, people who are experts, who are being bribed at the moment? When that bribes, or if that stops, will that lead to more of them speaking out? But another thing is, like, exactly, we have so many corrupt politicians that have given away things in this country, like the fishing rights. We own 24% of the fishing, but a lot of foreign trawlers come in and they just sweep up all the fish there, and Irish fishermen are losing out big time on that because we have given away the rights of that. Well, we haven't, but some gone-bean politician did for just for a few, whatever, just for his own, to give himself more money. That's the reason that happened. And then maybe this generation that you're talking about that's coming through now will actually produce politicians that will be more sort of principled people, that will, because they see this for what it is, they will try and create a different sort of an Ireland. But we shouldn't be putting it all on them either. We really need to, this is why I sort of support the National Party, because they speak about a lot of these issues as well, but I do think they need to address the social issues. You need to have social incentives for people to vote in a political party. You just do. And like Sinn Féin are great at this. They will say that we will do this and we'll do that, but when you look at, like, what they do, like, I don't know, they don't get into power, obviously not yet, it happened, but when you look at what they actually advocate for, it's just more of the same. As it's the neoliberal stuff that our Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael go along with, easing the regulator on capital and letting more companies into the country, and just not collecting the tax that we're owed on these companies. I think we really should be doing that. I know it's a left-wing sort of a talking point, but we really should be doing that. If we were collecting the money that we're owed, we went into this before, but if we were, the country could be so much different, and we're just not.
Well, yeah.
Because people are so just, it's just self-interest, all about me, me, me. These politicians that are there at the moment, we really need to get them out. And now they're after getting another 5 years, I think, because of this coronavirus. They're after
Yeah.
like, taking advantage of that situation. And if things were the way they were last year, there would have been another election, I think, and maybe Sinn Féin would have gone in, and we would have been able to see maybe if they would have done something. But because of this virus thing, they're after using that to their advantage. So many people are using this to their advantage now. But do you think that 30 euro per phone call thing, that's what I was thinking, and all these little bribes, like, will they last for, like, yeah, it's the same thing. Is it going to be a recession? So if a recession comes, they probably won't. And I hope that would lead to more people speaking out. People like Professor Dolores
Yeah.
Cattle and other people like that, who are very
They
qualified.
will. Look, they last. The people. The people that the government want on site. They're not too care. They don't care too much about small pubs and small businesses. There
No, they
has to
don't.
be victims. There has to be
Mm.
fallout. There has to be victims. I mean, if the government had enough money, I'm sure they just kind of maybe just pay the pubs, pay everybody, just make everybody a millionaire, just borrow, billions and billions from Europe. But I don't think that would wash, because, people are
Be
not
worthless.
entirely stupid. I think they're only partially stupid and slightly stupid and a quarter bit stupid, but they're not entirely stupid. So there has to be victims and there has to be winners, and the
Mm.
people who the government want to win and want to kind of stay on top. As I said, they're the people, the lobbyists, the powerful groups. I mean, if doctors start to complain, government gets in trouble. If nurses
Mm.
start complaining, government gets in trouble. If teachers start to complain, government gets in trouble. If a couple of publicans and a couple of hotel owners and small kind of businesses around the country, if they have to be the victims and the fallout of all this shit, then, tough shit, but
Yeah.
the money will certainly keep flowing to powerful people, powerful
Mm.
organizations, without a shadow of a doubt.
The
I
ones
mean,
they need.
on NPET, on the National Public Health Emergency Team, there's two GPs. The College of General Practitioners in Ireland is a very powerful organization. They're responsible for all the guidelines the GPs follow. They're on NPET. And if GPs are kind of, you see, everything in Ireland is so fucked up and so entirely fucking bent and corrupt that it's very, very hard to get anybody to kind of speak out, because the minute you speak out, you're opening up a huge can of worms. Like, the corruption that's going on in terms of, GPs being paid all of this money to kind of buy into the narrative, that's just the fucking tip of the iceberg. Irish medicine itself, the establishment of Irish medicine in this country is fundamentally rotten. It's rotten to the core. There's so much horrible rot in it. Now, I'm not saying that every doctor out there is corrupt. There are good people trying to work in a screwed up,
System.
system. But,
Mm.
people are paid and incentivized in order to go along with the flow. Like,
It's
take,
horrible.
for example, this Irish College of General Practitioners, for example. They're the college who issue the GP's guidelines and that. And the Irish College of General Practice, that has two members on NPET. So the ICGP, the body who controls GPs or issues them with guidelines, they're part of NPET, so they're locked in there. Now, if you're a member, if you're on the ICGP, if you join it, I mean, you have to become a GP, has to be a member of the Irish College in order to get a list, to get a medical card list. So in order to have a list of medical card patients, you have to be a member of the Irish College of General Practitioners, or you can be a member of the British College, because there's recognition. The government will recognize the British College. But
Mm.
now, I was once a member of the Irish College of General Practitioners, but I didn't renew my membership and just left them because I think that it's a corrupt organization that I personally, and that's just my opinion, who I have very little respect for. But
We need more people like that. Big time.
if I was part of this ICGP organization, and I was for quite some time, for a number of years, but if I was and most GPs, this is my point, most GPs are in the ICGP. If you're on the inside of this ICGP, well, you get a huge amount of kickbacks and benefits. Like, for example, if I could be an ICGP trainer, which means that at my practice, I work on my own. I have a nurse and I have two receptionists. I have a small little clinic that I run in North Dublin. That's mine. If I was in the ICGP and wanted to be a trainer, well, they would send me out a trainee GP, so a guy or girl who's finished her medical school training and wants to train to be a GP. He or she would come and work at my surgery free of charge. I wouldn't have to pay them a cent. I'd get some money, a little stipend, a little grant from the ICGP to in order to have this person work for me. I could take tea breaks, take a day off, go on holidays. This person's salary would essentially be paid for by the state, by you, by the taxpayer who would work there. And this doctor would collect the money from my private patients, and that would go into the till, and I would get that. So I would get all of these benefits, these huge benefits, as long as I toe the line, stay in with the ICGP, follow the guidelines, don't offer any complaints, don't make any questions, don't rock the boat, do what you're told, everybody's happy. That kind of example is not just simply for the ICGP. It's rife in Ireland. It's the teachers' union. It's the guards. It's everything else. It's you got to stay in the club. Don't rock the boat. So, but the thing that we don't realize in Ireland is that the people who we're shafting is ourselves. That's what we don't realize. That the people who we're screwing is ourselves in this society. We're robbing ourselves of our national wealth, of the capabilities and the potential to have a first-rate health service, a first-rate society, first-rate towns and villages, and first-rate schools with small numbers of kids in the classes, as we said earlier on. So the real tragedy in Ireland is that corruption is it's interwoven into the very fabric of our society, and I really, and medicine is a classic example of that. I'll give you another example. You take, for example, training doctors in Ireland. You look at the Royal College of Surgeons. That's where I went to medical school, at the Royal College of Surgeons. Well, every doctor, you go to the Royal College of Surgeons. The Royal College of Surgeons is a private medical school. So the fees to attend the Royal College of Surgeons are something in the region of 50 or 60,000 euros per annum to go there. And the vast majority of students at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland are foreign students. They're from the States, they're from the Middle East, or whatever. Now, you spend 6 years to be a medical doctor. For the last 3 years, you spend those in a teaching hospital. Well, so you've got, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of medical students at the Royal College of Surgeons. And for the last 3 years, they're not being taught in the College of Surgeons anymore. They're actually being taught in Beaumont Hospital. Well, who's paying the toilet paper, the canteens, the junior doctors' wages, the registrars, the consultants? Who's paying the wages to teach these medical students? You, the taxpayer. So you've got literally hundreds and hundreds of American, foreign medical students, Irish medical students paying 50 grand a year to the College of Surgeons, who then turfs the medical students into Beaumont Hospital or Drogheda Hospital, where the state pays the patients themselves. Now, most of these guys, they're going to head off back to their own country. They're gone after they've finished the training. So they get to practice on Irish citizens and Irish people. The taxpayer, gets to pay for the toilet roll, the hospital, the electricity, the cannulas, the needles, everything that they use. You pay. The taxpayer pays for all of that. The money that the students pay goes directly into the college. And the guys, when they graduate, well, they all piss off back to their own country. So, I mean, my point being, and I'm not kind of picking on the College of Surgeons, I'm just giving them as an example of medical training. Like, medicine in Ireland is fundamentally corrupt. It's so rotten. It's rotten right down into its core, and right at the very, very start, when doctors are being trained in medical school, corruption, money, interest, it complicates the whole thing. And that relationship of corruption and vested interest, it goes right on through to getting a place on a GP training scheme, to get into the ICGP, all of those sorts of things. It's all a web, an interconnected web of horrible vested interests and corruption, And, nobody in Ireland, people don't ask questions. Nobody gives a shit, I think I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this some time ago, and I was thinking, when the French had their revolution, you remember that there's always that phrase about storming the Bastille, and you can imagine when the French kind of, had their revolution, and they broke into Louis XIV's castle or whatever, and they were kind of taking all the clothes and taking all the jewels, or trying on the peasants kind of, who were trying on all the fancy gear and running around,
We need to do that.
I think the French had that, where they tried on all the clothes and everything, and then they chopped off heads, and then they established a republic. But in Ireland, I think we're still locked in the stage where the peasants are in the Bastille, trying on the clothes and putting on the hats and trying to grab as much for themselves as they can. And we haven't really left the Bastille, chopped off the heads, made a republic, and established an identity. At the minute in Ireland, everybody is screwing everybody, and it's self-interest up the fucking wazoo.
Yeah,
And I mean, I'm
that is
not
it.
doctor bashing, because the
No.
same amount of corruption, I mean, it's even far worse. I think it's probably much, much worse when you get into the type of corruption that goes on in the relationship between corporate Ireland, Apple, Google, the tax man, all of that. When you get into that, I mean, somebody was
It's
telling
way
me
worse.
once there's like 20 or 30 of the top accountancy firms in the world are right here in Ireland. This country is all about, money laundering, tax
Mm.
evasion by corporate entities, and that's all going around in the circles of the political elite. So it was hugely important. It was no coincidence, I don't think, that shortly after, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael got back into power through the Greens, shortly after, their appeal in order to try and give Apple back the 16 billion, whenever, that turned out to be successful, and that was just announced
Mm.
shortly after they got back into power. And the same guy, Eamon Ryan, when that all came out about the billions that was owed to Apple, he was jumping up in the Dáil saying, that money should go to the Irish people, that belongs to us, jumping up and down, screaming and roaring. But yet, when he was in that position where he held the kind of keys and they were
Mm.
saying, please come on board, we'll give you anything you want, not a
Said
peep.
nothing.
Not a
No.
peep about the Apple money, not a peep about that. And he's back in there,
All
calling the shots.
self-interest.
And, this is
Mm.
the same guy that was down and signed off on the gas line, signed off on selling off on the gas and all the rest of it. So, it's not just Irish medicine. I mean, I can talk
No.
about the corruption in Irish medicine because I'm a doctor and I'm
Mm.
part of it, and I profit from it, and I paid for my house on the back of all of this corruption. So I'm part of it, and I
Yeah,
have a
but you
bit
work
of
for it.
experience. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a bit of experience with the corruption in medicine, but I think it only scratches the tip of the iceberg when you compare it to corporate kind of what's going on. And as I said,
Does.
you made the point earlier about recession. The real sad thing is that in Ireland, the only people we're shafting is ourselves, and we could
Mm.
actually have a first-rate Scandinavian-based type of social structures here if we weren't so petty and greedy and self-interested,
Mm.
and I can only hope that maybe the younger generation coming after us will change things, because I don't see it in my profession. I mean, most GPs, an awful lot of GPs, think that I'm a complete whack job when I say stuff like this, that I'm a complete nutter. I
Yeah,
mean, I
but they
have
know
a
you're
few
right though.
friends. Well,
Yeah.
they know I'm right, but I can tell you this, I'm well
They think you're
hated.
mad for saying it. Mm.
Well, they don't just think I'm mad, but plenty hate my guts, because
Yeah.
I'm not afraid. I'm not
Because you're
afraid to
speaking
speak
truth to
about these
power.
things.
And that's the thing. If we had more people like you gave a great vision there earlier on that what Ireland could be like and what it should be like, and that we could reintroduce native things into the country and get the language going again, replant trees, and not like cover Ireland with trees, but make it more like it used to be. Bring our
Yes.
identity back. You give a great, and hopefully somebody will look at this video and actually in the future, some young person, and it will trigger them to actually maybe get involved in politics and try and change the country in some way. And it from the top down is the only way it can be changed in this sort of a way, like to try and change the corruption. So yeah, I just hope that happens. That's the thing. And in the meantime,
Yeah.
I don't know what the end game is of this thing that's going on at the moment. I was thinking that I'm not going to keep you much longer, but I think they want to bring in this thing that we're always been told is coming, the Internet of Things, where people will just sit at home and order things, whether it's ordering your food from Tesco on your phone, and they're telling you how much calories you have in the fridge through the
Yeah.
Wi-Fi and all of this. Like, and because of, I listened to an interview, as I said at the start there, with the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Hazel Chew, on that channel called it poses as a YouTube channel, but it's really mainstream media, Joe.ie, if anybody wants to look at the interview. And she says that there's going to be a new normal after this. It's not going to be the same as things were. And that's what I think the end game is. It's going to be what you said. Everyone has to get the vaccine, because now we're locked into the mask. And once
Yeah.
you have the masks as mandatory, the only way to get out of that is to actually get the vaccine. And then at the same time, people will be so afraid that this might happen again, they will be trying to get involved with the internet more and use the internet to order things, and it'll be this new sort of a society. I think that's what they're trying to work towards. But we could have a much better country, and I hope that's what does happen eventually, that people get involved in politics. I just try to talk about these things here, but you know, like we have no influence. But when you come on, it really gives it weight when you talk about these things, because you are a doctor and you have all of these different qualifications. So it's just great to hear from somebody like you. It's a pity there aren't more people in the country with balls like you that will get up and speak the truth, and have principles over this Gombeanism, for want of a better word. But
Yeah, well,
yeah, I just want to thank you for coming on as well, Doctor. But
look,
I,
it's great to be able to
it's
talk,
great to
Paul,
hear from you.
and it's great. Look, it's great to have an opportunity to talk about these things. I suppose it is kind of, I mean, I think that personally, I think, as you said, maybe some young people will come along and kind of see this, but
Yeah,
maybe there is a little bit of the fighting spirit left in Irish people. I mean, I mean, I would hope that
I think there is.
maybe we're not as stupid as it would seem, as a
Mm,
people. Maybe it might be dawning on people that, all of the people, all of the prophets, the people who are profiting out of this COVID narrative, there's three institutions. There's politics are certainly profiting in the sense that they don't have to look back. It's everybody look forward, no revision, no looking at did we make any mistakes, and no public inquiry. So that's politics is profiting and pushing us down that road. But it's very, very strange that the other two entities, the other probably one entity that's profiting out of this is Big Pharma, because
mm-hmm.
obviously they're going to make national or international vaccines, and other big corporate entities like Amazon and the Internet of
Yeah.
Things and all of this shit, shops and that are
Mm-hmm.
all closing down. So, is it really a big coincidence kind of that, the three entities, kind of, or two entities, big corporations and government, are the two institutions that are profiting the most from this, and the people who are suffering as kind of the population of Ireland, the working class people of Ireland, the Irish nation itself, our own culture, our own heritage, our environment, and our potential to build a future. All of those things are kind of suffering and hemorrhaging. So
Yeah.
hopefully people can start to make connections and join some dots. And maybe there will be a bit of a revolution, but there
I'd
will
love to
have
see
to
it.
be. There will
Yeah,
have to
there
be
will.
some sort of a revolution. But the rot is so bad and it stinks so
Mm.
much. I mean, it's refreshing that when you do. It's somewhat refreshing, perhaps is the right phrase. Maybe just a little bit refreshing to even realize or think how much suppression RTE has to do. Like, RTE has to
Mm.
do an awful lot of work to actually hunt down people like Luke O'Neill who've got huge conflict of interest. But we have to
Mm.
ask ourselves, maybe that's a good sign, because they couldn't have other people on. They won't have other people on. So I think that there are plenty of people in Irish society who are willing to speak up and willing to make change and willing to address the rot. But
Yeah.
it's up to guys like yourself to kind of have YouTube channels, have internet, have some alternative to this corporate vision of the new Ireland. We have to have an alternative to RTE, an alternative to Big Pharma, an alternative, and hopefully people like yourself will keep it alive, and hopefully there'll be a few more people like myself who won't be
Exactly.
afraid to kind of speak out.
Yeah, and I think so. I think that is what we have to do exactly, and just keep going along and trying to expose these things. And the more people that speak out, the better. I'm always encouraging people to create channels. There's no reason why you can't. It's not you're not doing anything illegal. Don't be trying to feel like you're doing something bad. You're not. You're speaking your mind. This is your time passing through this country. Give your opinion on these things. If you don't, it'll pass you by. And I just want to thank you very much for coming on again, Doctor. I'm going to put your Twitter in the description so that people can go and follow you there, because you do put up great posts, and I love watching them. So, yeah, I'm going to put that in the description, and people can follow you there. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks a million, and guys in the
Well,
chat, I'll talk to you again soon.